Dr. Gallant, Tricia Dr. Gallant를 우리 이야기를 들어보도록 하겠습니다.
I should have brought my translator up with me because I didn't hear the last part of that, but I know it's my turn. So thank you for having me, and I'd like to first apologize that my slides are not in your proceedings, and I'll apologize to the organizers because I was still making changes up in my presentation up until right before break, because I was incorporating other things that we heard this morning. And I do that often. I like to try and incorporate these things as we go along. So today I'm going to be talking about moving beyond research ethics, a proposal for the future. And I'm going to make sure the clicker is on. Okay. And I will forward some other way. Yeah, I'm clicking, nothing's happening. It's on. Sorry. So as we wait to figure that out, we're getting a different one maybe. It's on. I was... Oh, all right. We had switched the clicker out. Okay, so as I was looking at the email yesterday, I get these things called Google alerts. I don't know if you have those here, but you can tell Google the kind of news items that you want to have received in your mailbox. And in comes this one yesterday from a study done. It was just done by the student newspaper at this university. And they surveyed 95 natural science or engineering undergraduates and found that approximately 60% have fabricated research data. And the majority of those said it was a problem, but not really that serious. They also, a majority of them, 85%, admitted to receiving papers from others, and 44% of them copied from those papers. And again, the majority said, yeah, it's a problem, but it's not really very serious. So these are your future researchers. Well, 95 of them anyways. But I suspect that they represent a larger portion of the population, not just these 95 people. I think it's really important to know also that when we survey people about their misconduct, the numbers are going to be underreported. It's something we social scientists called social desirability bias. That means we do not admit to doing behaviors that are undesirable or dishonest. We want to appear as if we're honest, so we lie about our dishonesty. So we expect that these numbers are a bit higher than this. Really what we know from the beginning of research on this topic, starting from 1928 when Hartshorne and May did a study of primary school children and found out that all of them would cheat given the right situation. Up until more recently with Dan Airley from Duke University, who's done some really interesting studies, we have found that most, if not all of us, will cheat when presented with the opportunity or when we're faced with cheating that will get us just a little bit of benefit. And this is why we perhaps shouldn't be surprised when students or researchers plagiarize such a small paragraph that doesn't even add to the quality of their paper. We think it doesn't make sense. But decades of research have informed us that this would happen. Think about Michael Farthing this morning told us about the journal editor who maybe didn't ask him to fabricate data. All he wanted him to do was just add a few more citations from his journal. I think the implication was there, I don't care if you read them or not, just maybe add those citations. What this tells us, I'm going to argue today, is that we need to focus on ethics, not research ethics. I will argue that our focus on research ethics as a phrase limits the potential and limits the teachable moments that arise out of normal everyday experiences. And I'll use several evidences to buttress my argument, and a lot of it from students who have been caught from cheating or from those who have taken an ethics class, as well as evidence from other people's research. Whoops, this is going ahead without my knowledge. And, sorry, can somebody help me go back? Very sorry. Which one's back? That one? Sorry. Okay, so I hope by the end of this talk I've challenged your thinking. Our current way of teaching research ethics, research integrity, or the responsible conduct of research, whatever you want to call it, largely arises out of this rule compliance approach, which says do this or else you'll be punished. And this was forced on us really by external regulations and requirements. Universities now mostly teach research ethics because they have to in order to get funding, but also to protect themselves. In the event that a researcher does something wrong, we can say, we told you not to. It's not our fault. Some institutions and educators have attempted to go beyond this compliance approach to the integrity approach. That is, do this because it's the right thing to do. Again, we heard that earlier today talking about values and virtue ethics. This is laudable because it does help researchers see the internal motivations for upholding research ethics rather than only upholding it for internal reasons rather than only doing it for external controls. And it teaches them how to resolve ethical quandaries with integrity. What we also do, in addition to the rule compliance and the integrity approaches, is we segregate our teaching of ethics into different silos. The research office teaches research integrity, academic or student affairs teaches academic integrity, the medical school teaches medical or business bioethics, and the business school teaches business ethics. And these are just to name a few. But today I'm going to suggest there are 4 problems to this approach, although there are probably more. The first, I argue, is that by segregating the teaching of ethics into these various units or disciplines, we are paralyzing our ability to diagnose and treat the real problem. The real problem is shared between researchers and students, regardless of what act they're doing. Why researchers engage in misconduct is very much the same reason why students cheat. We hear a lot of those. These are usually rationalizations, but we hear about external pressures and lack of time and all of these things. But if we really drill down, we see that they share these in common. The second problem with this approach is it has a limited shelf life. When we just make it about research integrity, we are teaching students only that there are rules here in our labs or in our institution by which they must abide. This really then continues our focus on rule compliance and makes integrity seem unique or peculiar to the academic environment or research environment. It doesn't help prep our students for other careers and professions. Think of the the RCR education Professor Gallant shared with you earlier. Teaching a student about segmented topics like animal care or peer review will not help students act ethically as doctors or accountants or engineers and so on. Third, when we focus on research integrity, we miss the opportunity to teach that research ethics is ethics. After all, there is no difference in the behaviors between a researcher who copies from another journal article and a politician who copies her campaign speech from another politician. So why is one a violation of research integrity and the other one of professional integrity? Simply because of context? Such an explanation can be confusing to people learning about ethical decision-making, especially if they're trying to learn it in other languages, right? We have this global environment for research integrity or for education in general, and when we use all these different words, it makes it very confusing. When we make it about research integrity, we distinguish it as separate from academic integrity, professional integrity, personal integrity, and perpetuate the belief that ethics is relative from context to context. In essence, when we teach research ethics, we perpetuate the belief that ethical relativism is real and credible. Now, this is a very dangerous thing to train educated and trained minds. After all, if ethical relativism was allowed to flourish, we could continue to justify things like slavery, the sex trade industry, stoning of women who fall in love with someone outside their sect. And the list of moral atrocities would go on. And those that are most highly educated, i.e. those with degrees, would be leading this ethically relative pack. And fourth, when we separate these different areas of ethics, the larger systemic context that shapes behaviors towards misbehavior or misconduct isn't addressed. This could be why, as Michael Farthing noted earlier today, that research misconduct continues despite RCR education. Now, at this point, perhaps some of you are depressed, but we shouldn't be. We tend to avoid this reality because it makes most of us feel helpless, like there's nothing we can do. But it's okay, this is actually a fact of life. Let's look at the evidence. According to students who have breached academic integrity, this is at my institution, only 15% blame a lack of education on academic rules, citation practices as the reason for their cheating. The remainder say that they cheated and that their peers cheat because of stress and pressure. Sometimes these stressors and pressures are academic, to get the grade, and other times they come from their personal lives. I can't tell you how many students have told me about their parents and the pressures their parents put on them to get an A, to get into med school. So this means that our messages directed at preventing cheating or research misconduct misses many students. And it also shows that maybe our message is ineffective because the other 85% who knew what they were doing cheated anyways. In other words, our students, like many people, venture into cheating and plagiarism for reasons other than ignorance of the rules. It could be from lack of willpower, an abundance of greed, or just the inability to logically and clearly think through situations and the possible ethical resolutions. Our students are not alone in this. And the pressures and stressors that force their cheating will not dissipate once they graduate. So by reducing pressures or eliminating opportunities for cheating, such as through the rule compliance approach, preventing cheating or preventing research misconduct, we're not helping students learn how to ethically self-regulate. We are merely teaching them at best to comply or suffer the consequences. And interestingly, research has shown that regulations and restrictions, organizational policies and rules can actually facilitate cheating because people are trained to no longer self-regulate their own behaviors. So instead of seeing an issue as an ethical issue, we see it as a business or economic or logistics issue, anything other than ethical. And in so doing, when we're facing that issue, we then fail to activate our internal moral compass. Then, when we commit the acts, we can employ techniques of neutralization to explain them away. These techniques of neutralization are used to either convince us that it's okay to engage in the actions in the first place, or, after the fact, convince ourselves that we are still good people even though we've done them. For example, consider these stories from students who have engaged in academic integrity breaches at the university level. You'll hear techniques of neutralization they use. In this first story, we'll primarily hear the denial of responsibility neutralization technique. I was stuck. I tried hard, but I failed. I felt the stress from my family, my life, my future. The score of this class is important. It would be too bad if I got a low score. Suddenly, I saw. I made a decision that I never did before. I copied. After the exam, I felt bad, but I was hoping that no one would find out about it. So in that situation, we hear what we hear often: it wasn't my fault. I had no choice. I had no control over the situation. There was nothing else I could do. And again, this is not unique to our students. Donald Palmer, who wrote a really great book called Normal Organizational Wrongdoing, mentions this denial of responsibility as a technique used by many adults involved in many disastrous events events like the subprime mortgage crisis, if you heard about that, in the United States. In the second story, we hear the technique psychologists and Palmer call the appeal to higher loyalties. I was just honestly trying to help him finish. I had already helped him as much as I could. He obviously didn't listen to me, so I just gave him my assignment and he copied and pasted it in. This isn't a bad student. This isn't a cheater who's trying to pull one past us. This is a student who put loyalty to his friend above honesty or truthfulness to the institution. This is another one we hear often in the world of cheating and plagiarism. Yes, I committed a wrongdoing, but it was for loyalty, which is a noble goal or a sacred principle. And we were talking at dinner last night how that's very much true in the Korean culture, and I think it's true in many cultures, but it seems like the Korean culture, the African culture we also talked about, is very prevalent. There are many other techniques of neutralization that I won't go into today, because I think the point's been made. Our students and our researchers are human, and we cannot regulate or coordinate our way out of that. That's not to say that organizational structures, processes, and cultures don't matter. They do. Research has proven that. But because our population is refreshed every year with new students and new researchers, organizational features alone are not sufficient for dealing with the problem. Our students will cheat and plagiarize because it's normal, especially at their age, and actually, I argue it can be quite a valuable part of the educational process. And the reason I'm focusing on students today is because they are our future researchers, and as was mentioned earlier, we're starting too late if we're starting once they're already researchers. So our students cheat and plagiarize because they're human and they're young. And so in trying to eradicate student cheating and plagiarism, we're actually losing a valuable moment in their learning process. In fact, I argue instead of trying to eradicate it, we should leverage it for a teachable moment. It shouldn't be our goal. Now, this is different than talking about eradicating it at the research level. Of course, we can't have people, taking women's eggs and doing whatever they want with them. But at the student level, we should leverage this and be, I dare say sometimes, excited when students cheat or plagiarize, when they make mistakes, because what a valuable learning opportunity. After all, integrity isn't about perfection, but a process of development and learning. So we need to allow students to make ethical mistakes, take accountability for those mistakes, and then help them learn from them. My enlightenment to this idea came about 3 or 4 years ago, again, from another experience I had with yet another student who had violated academic integrity twice. You see, the first time he cheated, he neutralized the act by telling himself that his behavior was only considered cheating because the professor defined it as such. Thus, he determined that to avoid cheating, he simply needed to do a more thorough job of reviewing the course rules. Less than a year later, however, that same student was reported for a second violation, and one day he came to my office to come clean, to admit that he had done it. He was distraught and embarrassed. And this is what he said to me. I was originally denying this because I was terrified of getting kicked out of school, and he was going to be suspended. I even made myself believe that I had done nothing wrong, and the university was just out to get me. But then I found I wasn't sleeping, I couldn't eat, I couldn't study. I felt so guilty. I was lying, and in doing so, making the matter worse and causing a lot of people a lot of lost time. So I'm here to apologize, withdraw my request for a hearing, and take my punishment. I was devastated. By this time, the student was crying, and I was heartbroken because I knew him. He had previously been in a class that I had taught in which we tried to leverage his experience as a teachable moment. So I asked him why. How did this happen? How did I fail to teach you what you needed to know? And he said, it's not your fault. My first violation was blatant. So I figured I had learned my lesson, do what I was told and not get into trouble. so I didn't listen in your class. But this violation was in a gray zone. It wasn't strictly prohibited, so I did it, even though I knew deep down it was dishonest. For this student, our goal of making him understand the rules of academic integrity had failed him. Had we taught him ethical reasoning, he might have been able to stop himself from engaging in the second violation of academic integrity, which did cause him to be suspended from campus. So after that conversation, I changed the course to include an opportunity for students to develop their ethical decision-making skills. Now when I teach ethical decision-making to my students, the most common refrain I hear is, "Why has no one ever taught us this before?" Indeed, it's a good question. Why isn't ethical decision-making an integral part of our curriculum? I think we have to help students move beyond knowing what is right and wrong and helping them act on those beliefs. And we have to help them resolve more complex ethical dilemmas like truth versus loyalty and justice versus mercy. So I propose an expanded conversation. Maybe our goal should not, at the undergraduate level or high school and elementary level, our goal should not be to make cheating the exception and integrity the norm, but to accept that cheating and plagiarism is going to occur and celebrate the door it opens for us when they do cheat or plagiarize. If we prep students for the stressors and pressures they will face as students and professionals, and teach them ways to remain ethical in the face of those stressors and pressures, then we leverage the learning that could occur for the inevitable times that they fail. In doing so, we could prepare students for the real world out there. We would reduce additional cheating and plagiarism. We would spread the word amongst the student population. And we could teach them to be more ethical researchers. Because without our guidance, many students will not learn and develop as a result. They will enter their professions with discipline-specific knowledge, but poor ethical reasoning skills. Poor communication skills because they've plagiarized instead of writing the paper themselves, and the same poor work habits that got them through our institution. Perhaps this is why we have so many researchers who cheat. They were never taught these ethical decision-making skills. So we have to move beyond research ethics, and the first thing we need to do is drop the word research or academic or business or medical ethics as qualifiers. We are educators preparing our students for the rest of their lives, not just preparing them to conduct research. Thus, our goal of enhancing research integrity will not help the majority of our students who will not spend the rest of their lives doing research. Australia uses the term educational integrity to include all members of the academy in the conversation and try and bridge that chasm that exists between research and academic integrity. And it's a good attempt, but I think it's still limited. We must also do more about creating strong ethical cultures that support ethical choices. We have a particularly important role as universities, a role to play in society, and we can't fulfill that role if we're not ethical. So this does mean attending to the ethical structures, processes, norms, and language, and behaviors that support ethical choices of all our members in our institutions. And at the same time, looking at those, Bazerman and Tenbunzel call them ethical sinkholes, those areas where we know people are going to be more tempted or there might be more opportunities for cheating. In particular, it is our obligation to prepare students to function with integrity in and outside of our walls. It's our job not to just teach students about academic or research integrity, but to teach them about integrity and ethical decision-making. Help them understand the challenge in it. That is, it's not enough to just be a good person. And help them develop as ethical citizens and professionals who will be able to resist the call to misconduct that will be present throughout their lives. So it's insufficient just to create strong ethical cultures, to create systems and structures and policies and procedures. We must provide to students the opportunity to develop their ethical fitness. And earlier we heard about recklessness, and what is recklessness research misconduct? Well, I would argue it is unethical. It comes from a lack of ethical thinking. That is putting ethics first, recognizing that you're facing an ethical issue. And it's also a result of a lack of intentional, thoughtful processes of thinking through things. Thus, as I hinted at earlier, we should teach ethical decision-making. And this doesn't mean necessarily adding an ethics class that everybody has to take, but infusing ethical teachable moments throughout the core disciplinary classes. I had a student once who was reported for cheating, and she was taking my class, and she wanted to tell me what had happened. And she doesn't have to, but she wanted to tell me. So she said, this is what happened to me. I wrote my paper like I always do, and I sent it to my mom. And then it came back really different. And I said to my mom, Mom, you didn't go on the internet for any of this stuff, did you? Because my mom likes to go on the internet. She told me no, but then she said, then Turnitin said my paper was 40% plagiarized. And so I said, what's the lesson learned from this? And she said, check the work my mom does. This wasn't a bad person. She didn't even realize that it was an ethical issue to send her paper home to her mom because she'd been doing it all her life. Her mother insisted that she had done it all her life. It was our obligation to help her develop that skill of recognizing an ethical issue when she's facing one. Students recognize the importance of ethics. They crave the conversations, and we have to be trained in facilitating these conversations, and we don't have to be ethicists to do so. I've seen no research that shows a philosopher only a philosopher can teach ethics. We're not teaching them about Aristotle and Kant and the history of philosophizing, but the skills and habits of everyday decision-making and the moral imperative of not being an ethical bystander. And we need to do this, especially after they've erred and violated an integrity policy, because, as I mentioned earlier, it is a teachable moment, and it gives them that grounding from which they can learn. One way that we can do this is just one decision-making model that I use, is just going through and teaching students all the steps for making an ethical decision. And I do this in a whole course over a 10-week period, but we can take them through the step, and these kind of skills they can apply when they're facing a research case, or an academic case, or an engineering case, or a medical case, or a bioethics case. And if they practice and practice this, it becomes more habitual and easy and quick. So this student was interesting because she, after taking the ethics class, she said this: I was able to act on doing the right thing in the moment due to the rationales and realizations that this class has given me about moral ethics. It's one thing to recognize right from wrong, but it is another thing to actually act and do the right thing. This is what this class has taught me, and that is what helped me and gave me the extra push in doing the right thing. I must say that we also have to reward attention to integrity and ethics. This is extremely important. Right now, a lot of our faculty get rewarded for publishing a paper. They don't get rewarded for spending time on teaching integrity, teaching ethics, and responding to integrity violations when they occur. And that needs to change as well if we want people to actually think that this is important. In the end, really what I'm suggesting today is something I've been advocating since I published my first book in 2008. For our students, academic and research integrity are not conduct issues, they are teaching and learning issues. The integrity movement must be about enhancing teaching and learning, not just the teaching and engine of engineering or chemistry or computer science or nursing, but the teaching and learning of integrity and ethics. We shouldn't be focused on eradicating cheating and misconduct, especially amongst our students, because this will be a war we'll never win. It is about the core of what we do, educating the next generation of scholars and leaders, researchers and politicians, teachers and executives, and educating them to do all of these things with integrity. This does not mean trying to produce perfect soldiers who fall in line and comply, but developing thoughtful, engaged, ethical professionals and citizens who will be able to recognize a moral issue when they're facing it and have the skills and knowledge to think through before acting. Perhaps they will not always act with integrity, and certainly they will ethically fail, like you and I have done. But hopefully they'll be the people who will stand up and say, I messed up, and then learn and grow from each error. After all, look how much Korea has learned from the Wang scandal. It's possible. Thank you very much.